You've woken from it before, heart still going, not sure where the dream ended. What you felt wasn't noise from a resting brain. There is a system behind it, one that runs while you sleep, encoding what the waking day couldn't carry. Tonight, we follow the language it uses. The strange thing is this: the more frightening the dream, the more carefully your brain may be working on your behalf. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. If you've been waking from something that left you unsettled, wondering what it means, or whether something is wrong, you're not alone in that feeling of waking into something unresolved. The familiar pull of a dream that won't quite explain itself is exactly why we're here tonight. If this channel has become the place you return to when the mind gets loud after dark, subscribe and come back whenever the loop needs company. Before we go further, let's take one breath together. Breathe in slowly, and as you breathe out, let the alarm begin to quiet. Let whatever woke you start to settle. We're here to understand it, not to be afraid of it. What if the nightmare wasn't a malfunction, but a message the brain couldn't deliver any other way? Your brain has been running a kind of rehearsal while you slept, practicing, processing, preparing for what it considers unfinished. You are somewhere between the fear and whatever it was trying to tell you. The night has been working, and now we begin to read. The human brain does not sleep passively. During REM sleep, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming, neural activity in emotional processing regions rivals that of waking life. The amygdala, which handles fear and threat detection, shows some of its highest activity levels during this phase. When you wake from a nightmare, heart racing, body damp with sweat, that response is real because your brain registered something real. It activated the same circuits it would use if the threat were standing in the room. This is not a glitch. It is the system working exactly as it was built to work. And understanding why it works this way changes everything about how we hold the experience of being frightened in our sleep. The term nightmare has roots in Old English. Mare referred to a spirit believed to sit on a sleeper's chest, causing suffocation and dread. Across cultures and centuries, humans have consistently tried to explain the experience of waking in terror from a dream. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe dream spirits. Medieval physicians blamed digestive imbalance. Freud saw suppressed wishes. What every culture agreed on, without knowing the neuroscience. Was this the nightmare carried meaning? The imagery changed. The explanation changed. But the human instinct that something was being communicated, that remained constant. Modern sleep science is, in a way, catching up to what people have always felt to be true. Many studies estimate that a substantial majority of dreams involve negative emotions, with fear being among the most common. This might seem counterintuitive. Why would an evolved brain spend so much of its rest time generating fear? According to threat simulation theory, it serves a purpose. Finnish neuroscientist Antti Revonsuo proposed in 2000 that nightmares and threatening dreams exist to rehearse responses to danger. The dreaming brain runs simulations, scenarios of confrontation, pursuit, loss, humiliation, not to torment the sleeper, but to build and maintain the threat response system. It is practice. Uncomfortable, vivid, heart-pounding practice. The discomfort is the point. REM sleep has a biochemical quality unlike any other brain state. During this phase, the brain is largely cut off from norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter most associated with stress and anxiety. Sleep researchers have described REM as something like an overnight processing space, a window where emotional memories are replayed without the full neurochemical charge that made them painful. The emotion is present enough to engage. The stress response is quiet enough that the engagement doesn't re-traumatize. This is the condition the brain needs to drain the weight from difficult experiences. Nightmares, in this framework, are not the problem. They may be part of how the problem gets resolved. The images in nightmares are not random. Studies of nightmare content across large populations reveal consistent themes: being chased, falling, being paralyzed, losing teeth, failing an important test, being attacked. These themes appear across cultures with striking regularity, suggesting they are not products of personal history alone, but of shared human threat categories. Being chased rehearses the predator response. Falling rehearses loss of footing or control. Paralysis mirrors the motor inhibition of REM itself, the body's system for preventing us from acting out our dreams. Surfacing as content, the nightmare is, in part, a map of what the species has learned to fear across time. Post-traumatic nightmares differ from ordinary threatening dreams in one significant way: they replay rather than simulate. Where a typical nightmare might involve symbolic or transformed versions of threat, trauma-related nightmares often replay the traumatic event with high fidelity. Same location, same sensory details, same emotional ending. Researchers believe this reflects the brain's attempt to process an experience that exceeded its capacity at the time of the event. The overnight processing is still running, but the material is too intense, too precisely encoded, for the usual transformation to take place. The translator keeps reaching for the same passage and finding it won't yield. This is why trauma and nightmare frequency are so tightly linked. The amygdala is not the only region active during nightmares. The anterior cingulate cortex, involved in detecting conflict and emotional salience, shows elevated activity. The prefrontal cortex, which normally exercises top-down regulation of emotion during waking hours, is comparatively quieter during REM. This shift in the balance of power is what gives nightmares their helpless quality. You cannot reason your way out of the fear while you are inside the dream. The part of you that evaluates is offline. The part of you that feels is fully present. This is not a design flaw. It is the condition required for deep emotional processing. The helplessness is the doorway. Children have nightmares more frequently than adults. Peak frequency occurs between ages 3 and 6, and again between ages 10 and 12. Both periods coincide with significant cognitive and social development. The brain is processing an enormous amount of new information about danger, social hierarchies, loss, and the gap between what is wished and what is real. Developmental psychologists suggest that high nightmare frequency in early childhood serves the same rehearsal function Reverend Suo described in adults. But at a time when the threat library is being built from scratch, the child who nightmares frequently is not disturbed. They are in a very real sense, growing their threat detection system from the ground up. There is a documented relationship between nightmare frequency and how emotional material is handled during waking hours. People who tend to push away or not engage with difficult feelings during the day show higher nightmare frequency at night. The brain appears to reroute unprocessed emotional content into the sleep cycle. What is kept out of waking awareness does not disappear. It is deferred. And the deferral system runs on REM sleep. This connection between the texture of the day and the content of the night is one reason that certain approaches, particularly those that create more space for emotional engagement during waking hours, also tend, over time, to reduce nightmare frequency. The smoke detector framing of nightmare function. The frame we'll carry through the first part of this hour comes from within threat simulation theory. A smoke detector is calibrated for sensitivity. It goes off for burnt toast. It goes off for actual fire. The alarm itself does not distinguish between the two. It detects the signal and responds fully. The nightmare system works similarly. It does not issue mild warnings. It activates completely. Not because the threat is necessarily real, but because evolution long ago decided that the cost of a missed real threat far outweighs the cost of a false alarm. The question worth sitting with is not whether the alarm is too loud. It is what the alarm is reading. Dream content research by Katya Valley and colleagues, building on Revonsuo's work, found that threatening dreams are not simply unpleasant. They follow a logic. The dreamer almost always survives. Escape attempts are made. Responses are tested. The dreaming brain is not simply generating horror. It is running scenarios with outcomes. In the vast majority of threatening dreams, the dreamer engages with the threat in some way, even if unsuccessfully. The simulation is interactive. This is meaningfully different from passive suffering. The nightmare is giving you practice. Even when the practice feels awful, even when the practice leaves you waking into the dark with your heart going. Lucid dreaming. The state in which a dreamer becomes aware they are dreaming has been studied as a potential tool for nightmare modification. In a lucid state, the dreamer retains enough prefrontal activation to recognize the dream context and, in some cases, intentionally alter its content. Research by Ursula Voss and colleagues documented the neurological signature of lucid dreaming increased gamma wave activity in the prefrontal cortex, a partial return of the waking brain's regulatory capacity during REM. Some studies suggest that people trained in lucid dreaming report fewer distressing nightmares. The rehearsal room is the same. What changes is that a second voice enters it, one that knows it is a rehearsal. The content of a nightmare often encodes the emotional theme rather than the literal event. A person navigating a difficult professional relationship may dream of being chased by strangers. Someone moving through grief may dream of failing to find a door that will open. The brain, during REM, does not store experiences as narratives. It stores them as emotional signatures, and it retrieves them as images that carry those signatures forward. Reading a nightmare, literally, is like reading a poem for its information content. The signal is in the feeling, not the story. This is why dream interpretation systems across traditions converge on emotional tone, rather than cataloging symbols. Night terrors. A phenomenon distinct from nightmares. occur during non-REM deep sleep rather than REM. The person experiencing a night terror may scream, thrash, or appear awake while remaining deeply unconscious. They rarely remember the episode. Unlike nightmares, which are REM-based and involve vivid narrative imagery, night terrors appear to involve an incomplete arousal from slow-wave sleep, a kind of halfway state between deep sleep and waking. The two have different mechanisms, different neurological signatures, and different implications. What we are following tonight is the REM-based nightmare specifically, the one that leaves imagery in the morning, the one that carries meaning the system was trying to process. Certain medications increase nightmare frequency as a side effect. Beta blockers, some antidepressants, drugs for Parkinson's disease, and certain blood pressure medications have all been associated with more vivid or frequent nightmares. The mechanism in most cases involves alteration of REM architecture, either extending REM duration or changing the neurochemical environment during that phase. If nightmare frequency has changed alongside a medication change, the connection is worth raising with a physician. The brain has not suddenly become more distressed. The translation system has been recalibrated by chemistry. Knowing that distinction between a system under load and a system that has been adjusted changes what the experience means. There is a phenomenon called REM rebound. When someone who has been sleep deprived or whose REM sleep has been suppressed returns to normal sleep patterns, the brain compensates with unusually vivid, emotionally intense REM activity. People who stop drinking after a period of heavy use often report dramatic increases in dream vividness and nightmare frequency. This is not psychological deterioration. It is neurological recovery. The brain is reclaiming the processing it was denied. The flood of intense dreams is the catch-up system running at full capacity. Uncomfortable, disorienting, but a sign of restoration, not damage. The translator has been given back its materials and is working quickly. The relationship between stress and nightmares is measurable in a specific way. Studies tracking nightmare frequency during periods of elevated life stress, bereavement, job loss, relocation, illness, consistently find increases that parallel the stress curve, and then diminish as the stressor resolves. The nightmare system is not stuck. It is tracking. It scales with the amount of unprocessed emotional material being presented to it. When the load decreases, the frequency decreases. This is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that nightmares are functional, responsive to something real, and quiet when that something is resolved. The alarm does not run indefinitely. It runs while there is something to run on. Sleep researchers have documented a first night effect. The tendency for REM sleep to be lighter, more fragmented, and associated with more frequent dreaming and nightmare-like activity in an unfamiliar environment. This is believed to reflect an ancient vigilance response. In an unknown space, the brain remains partially alert, sampling the new environment rather than fully releasing into sleep. The system is hedging. It does not know yet whether this place is safe. The result is often a disturbed, dream-heavy first night in a new bed, hotel room, or home. The brain is not anxious about the place. It is cataloging it. The alarm is set to a lower threshold until the environment has been filed as safe. In one longitudinal study, researcher Michelle Schredel and colleagues found that nightmare content about interpersonal conflict was associated with higher subsequent stress reports. If this finding holds in larger samples, it would suggest the dreaming brain may not only be processing what has already happened, it may be pre-processing, running scenarios for anticipated challenges, a past-facing processing tool and a forward-facing preparation system simultaneously. It is rehearsing what might come, not only what has been. The alarm is not only an archivist, it may also be a planner, flagging what the waking mind has not yet consciously acknowledged as worth preparing for. The emotional residue of a nightmare, the lingering feeling of dread, unease, or sadness that follows a person into the morning, is a documented phenomenon researchers sometimes call dream mood carryover. Studies have found that participants woken from nightmares rate their morning mood as significantly lower than those woken from neutral or positive dreams. This effect typically fades over the course of the day but can persist into the evening for particularly vivid episodes. The low mood is not free-floating anxiety. It has a source. The brain ran something difficult overnight, and the emotional afterimage is still present. Naming it as residue, as the echo of a process, can loosen its hold. The imagery of nightmares is generated by the same mechanisms that produce all dreaming. The hippocampus retrieving emotional memory fragments, the visual cortex constructing scenes, the narrative-building regions weaving them into experience. What makes a nightmare feel so real is precisely that the brain is not distinguishing between imagination and perception during REM. The visual cortex is active. The body responds. The fear is felt before it is evaluated. The content is constructed, but the experience is genuine. This is why dismissing a nightmare as just a dream misses something real. The imagery was constructed. The emotion was not. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and holding both is the beginning of something. Some cultures have developed practices specifically designed to engage with nightmare content rather than dismiss it. Among certain indigenous communities, nightmare content is shared in the morning as a form of communal processing. The dreamer speaks the dream aloud, and the community witnesses it. This practice bears a structural resemblance to what modern trauma therapy calls narrative exposure, the deliberate telling and retelling of a difficult experience in a safe context, which gradually reduces its emotional charge. The insight that something is done with the nightmare, not simply away from it, appears across vastly different cultural frameworks. The alarm is not silenced by covering it. It is quieted by being answered. Nightmare frequency in adults averages roughly 2 to 3 per month, but this varies enormously by individual. Roughly 10 to 15% of adults report nightmares severe enough to cause distress or impaired daytime function. Women report nightmares at slightly higher rates than men across most studies, a difference believed to reflect a combination of hormonal factors, differences in emotional memory encoding, and possibly higher baseline rates of emotional distress reporting. At the clinical end, nightmare disorder, a diagnosed condition defined in the DSM-5-TR, requires that nightmares be frequent, distressing, and disruptive to sleep or daily functioning. Occasional nightmares, however vivid, fall within the normal range of human sleep experience. The content of recurring nightmares is particularly informative. Unlike single-episode nightmares, which may reflect transient stress, a nightmare that returns night after night is pointing to something the translation system has not yet resolved. The same passage is being reached, again and again, because it has not yet yielded. Recurring nightmares are among the strongest indicators in clinical sleep research that unprocessed emotional material is present, and that the system is persistently trying to engage with it. They are not evidence of a broken system. They are evidence of a very determined one that will not stop presenting the same draft until someone agrees to sit with it. The nightmare has a logic. It fires because something in the threat detection system has been activated. By stress, by unprocessed memory, by a chemical shift, by the demands of development, by the evolutionary cost-benefit of false positives. The system is not random. It is responsive. It is tracking something. And the first step toward understanding its volume is not to cover your ears. It is to recognize what it is responding to. That recognition is what the rest of this hour builds toward. From the mechanics of the message, to the patterns in the imagery, to what it means to finally, quietly, hear what the translation was always trying to say. What shifts now, what we notice, sitting with this hour, is that knowing the system has a logic and being able to hear what it's saying are two different things. The science describes the alarm. It doesn't yet describe the message. And that distinction matters more than it might seem. Because the people who find their nightmares beginning to ease, really ease, not just become less frequent, are almost always the ones who moved from "how do I make it stop" to "what is it saying?" What tends to stay with people is that understanding the mechanism doesn't automatically make the alarm quieter. You can know exactly why the smoke detector fires and still wake at 2 in the morning with your heart in your throat. Let that land where it needs to. Imagery, rehearsal, therapy, or IRT, is among the best studied behavioral interventions for chronic nightmares. Developed by Barry Krakow and colleagues, the technique involves selecting a recurring nightmare during waking hours, changing its ending or content to something neutral or positive, and then mentally rehearsing the altered version repeatedly over several days. Controlled trials have found significant reductions in nightmare frequency and distress for individuals with PTSD-related and chronic nightmares. The mechanism is exactly what the name suggests: rehearsal. The brain, offered a revised script during waking hours, begins to run the revised version during sleep. The translation system accepts the new draft. The old one gradually loses priority. The emotional theme of a nightmare tends to be more consistent across episodes than the specific imagery. A person whose nightmares cluster around abandonment may dream of being left behind in a crowd, failing to board a plane, arriving to an empty house, or losing the phone that connects them to everyone they know. The images differ. The emotional core, the experience of being alone in a way that cannot be fixed, recurs. Sleep researchers have used this principle to develop content analysis systems for nightmare research coding, not the literal objects or events, but the emotional categories they activate. Reading the nightmare's emotional signature is more revealing than cataloging what appeared in it. The imagery is the envelope. The feeling is the letter. There is a documented association between nightmare content and creative output. Writers, visual artists, and musicians report drawing on nightmare imagery at higher than average rates. And survey data suggests that people in creative professions have nightmares more frequently than those in less imaginatively demanding work. Whether this reflects a causal relationship, the same brain processes that generate creative imagery also generate more vivid threat simulations. Or a selection effect is not yet clear. What it suggests is that the richness of the nightmare's imagery is not simply suffering. It is the same generative capacity that produces meaning in waking life. Running at night, pointed at what is feared rather than what is hoped. The dreamer and the artist are using the same room. There is a well-established relationship between nightmare frequency and anxiety disorders. Individuals with generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and social anxiety disorder all show elevated nightmare rates compared to the general population. But the directionality of this relationship is not simply anxiety causes nightmares. Research suggests the relationship is bidirectional. Anxiety fuels nightmare content, and nightmares, through their after effects, contribute to daytime anxiety. Waking in terror creates anticipatory anxiety about sleep, which fragments sleep, which increases REM disruption, which produces more nightmares. Understanding this feedback loop is essential for breaking it. The alarm conditions the system that receives the alarm, which is why quieting one part of the cycle creates movement in the whole. The parasympathetic nervous system, responsible for the rest and digest state, is largely suppressed during REM sleep. The sympathetic system, associated with threat response, is more active. This is why the physical signs of a nightmare, elevated heart rate, muscle tension, rapid eye movement, mirror the body's waking fear response. The body has not misread the dream as real. The body is doing exactly what the nervous system instructs. This is also why techniques that work for waking anxiety, slow diaphragmatic breathing, gentle progressive relaxation, have been used successfully in the transition period after waking from a nightmare. The physiological system is available to be addressed, even when the dream content has already dissolved. There is a category of nightmare researchers described as existential, not involving physical threat, but confronting the dreamer with loss of meaning, identity dissolution, or the awareness of mortality. These nightmares are more common in midlife and older adulthood, and tend to increase during periods of significant identity transition, a career change, the loss of a long-term role, the death of a parent. These events carry existential weight that the narrative-building brain has to engage with somehow. The translation system fires not only at physical danger, but at threats to the coherence of the self. The dream is asking, who are you now? If not the thing you have always been, it is a hard question. It is also a necessary one. Sleep continuity. The degree to which sleep is fragmented or uninterrupted has a direct relationship with nightmare recall. People who wake more frequently during the night are more likely to recall nightmares, because recall is highest immediately upon waking from REM. A person who sleeps through the night may have had equally distressing REM content without remembering it. The message arrived, but was not read on waking. This creates a paradox. Interventions that improve sleep continuity sometimes temporarily increase nightmare distress reports. Not because nightmares increase, but because more are now being remembered. The measure of distress and the measure of nightmare frequency are not always the same number, and confusing them leads to misreading what is changing. Temperature regulation during REM is different from other sleep stages. The thermoregulatory system, which maintains body temperature during waking hours and during non-REM sleep, is substantially less active during REM. Core body temperature becomes more responsive to ambient temperature during dreaming phases. Sleeping in a room that is too warm correlates with more frequent and disturbing dreams. The discomfort of an overheated body may be woven into dream content as a sense of danger or threat. This is one reason why sleep environment optimization, cooler room temperature, breathable bedding, can reduce nightmare frequency without any psychological intervention whatsoever. The alarm system and the body's thermostat are reading from the same inputs. Dreams appear to draw on memories from a specific window of the recent past, a period of approximately 1 to 2 days, called the day residue, combined with older memories from approximately 5 to 7 days prior, sometimes called the dream lag effect. This pattern, documented by researchers including Michael Schredel, suggests that the processing system has a rhythm, fresh encoding followed by a consolidation period, with full integration attempted around a week later. Nightmare content may therefore reflect not only current distress, but concerns that were present 7 to 10 days ago. Events whose emotional weight was not immediately apparent, but has since been building quietly in the background, unacknowledged, until the translator brought them forward. People who experience frequent nightmares show greater activation in the insular cortex, involved in interoceptive awareness, the sense of what is happening inside the body. During waking exposure to negative emotional stimuli, those who are more attuned to internal bodily signals during waking hours appear to generate more emotionally intense experiences during sleep. Research suggests this is a calibration, not a pathology. The same sensitivity that produces vivid nightmares may also underlie deeper attunement to others, richer emotional experience, and a stronger signal when something in life needs attention. What looks like a cost from one angle looks like a feature from another. The same antenna, different readings. Anger, not only fear, is a common emotion in nightmare content. Studies of dream effect across large samples consistently find that anger is among the most frequently reported emotions, second only to fear. Dreams involving conflict, confrontation, violation of fairness, or the failure of authority figures to protect the dreamer are extremely common. The significance of this is that nightmare processing is not only about managing fear, it is about managing the full spectrum of threat-related emotion, including responses to injustice, powerlessness, and betrayal. A nightmare that leaves you angry rather than frightened is still part of the same system. The translator handles all of it, not only the content that reads as fear. One of the most consistently replicated findings in nightmare research is that the act of writing about a nightmare, not analyzing it, just describing it in detail reduces its emotional charge over time. This is consistent with a broader literature on expressive writing, pioneered by James Pennebaker, which found that putting difficult emotional material into language reduces physiological stress markers and improves psychological well-being. The act of translating imagistic, emotional dream content into sequential verbal language appears to engage processing resources that were not involved during the dream itself. Something that existed only as image and sensation becomes something that can be held in language, and what can be held in language can, eventually, be set down. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, the experience of waking and being temporarily unable to move, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations, is distinct from nightmares but frequently confused with them. Sleep paralysis occurs when REM motor inhibition continues briefly into the waking state. The hallucinations that accompany it, figures at the bedside, a sense of presence, pressure on the chest, are the brain constructing a narrative around the terror of paralysis. Across cultures, these hallucinations have generated folklore: the night hag, the incubus, the shadow figures of Japanese kanashibari. The brain's narrative system is so persistent that even the physiological experience of paralysis is immediately converted into story. It cannot tolerate meaninglessness. It will always reach for an explanation. Children's nightmares are qualitatively different from those of adults. Children's nightmares more frequently feature archetypal threat figures, monsters, witches, shadowy animals, rather than the more realistic interpersonal threats that dominate adult nightmare content. Researchers believe this reflects the developmental stage of the threat simulation system children draw on cultural and evolutionary threat archetypes because their personal threat library is still small. As the child accumulates real-world experience of loss, conflict, and social danger, the nightmare content shifts toward more specific, personal, recognizable scenarios. The monsters gradually grow human faces. The fears become more accurate. The translator learns to work with increasingly precise material. A single nightmare does not indicate psychological distress. The clinical threshold for nightmare disorder, as defined in the DSM-5-TR, requires nightmares to be frequent, to cause significant distress or impairment, and to be not better explained by another condition or substance. By this standard, the vast majority of nightmare episodes, including highly vivid, emotionally intense ones, fall within normal variation. The brain has run a processing cycle. The translator worked through the night. The signal only becomes a problem when it is chronic, impairing, and unresponsive to the normal resolution mechanisms that most people's brains eventually apply on their own. Most nightmares are not a disorder. They are a draft. During waking life, the hippocampus binds emotional and contextual memory together. This is how a smell or a song can suddenly reconstruct an entire emotional scene from years ago. During REM sleep, the hippocampus continues to process these bindings, connecting recent experiences to older memory networks. This is part of why nightmare content can feel both completely new and strangely familiar. The imagery is novel, but it is built on old emotional scaffolding. A dream about a stranger in an unfamiliar city may be running on the circuitry of a childhood experience of being unsafe. The The scene is new. The architecture beneath it is not. Research on nightmare content in people going through divorce has found a consistent cluster of themes being lost in a house they cannot find their way out of. Arriving somewhere and finding the familiar has become strange. Losing the ability to speak at a critical moment. These images are not random. They are precise translations of the emotional experience of a life reorganizing around loss. The nightmare system is not dramatizing. It is being accurate. This is what the experience contains. The imagery is the emotional truth in the only language the sleeping brain has available. Not words, not analysis, but scenes. The draft is faithful to what the person is actually living through. A subtle trigger during waking life, a tone of voice, a smell, a brief moment of social rejection can activate an associated emotional memory network, which the brain then has access to during sleep. The nightmare may therefore run an amplified, imagistically elaborated version of something that was only a flicker during the day, something that barely registered consciously. The translator noticed it, filed it, and at night, without the day's competing demands, brought it forward in full. The flame in the dream was a spark while you were awake. The size of the flame tells you something about the size of what the spark landed in. There is a subset of dreaming, called hyperassociative dreaming, in which the brain draws improbable connections between disparate memories, creating the logic-defying quality of certain dreams. Researchers have proposed that this hyperassociative quality, this willingness to connect things that have no obvious surface relation, is part of what makes REM sleep valuable for creative insight and emotional integration. The same process that makes dream content strange and surreal is the one that allows the brain to find unexpected connections in waking life. The nightmare that seems incoherent, jumping from location to location, featuring impossible combinations of people and places, is the translator working with an unusually wide aperture. It is reaching across what the waking mind keeps separate. The experience of nightmares changes across the lifespan in a predictable arc. Frequency is highest in childhood, decreases through adolescence and early adulthood, stabilizes in middle age, and shows complex patterns in older adulthood. Some studies find increases associated with health-related concerns, loneliness, or bereavement, and others find decreases as emotional regulation capacity matures. The nightmare is not a fixed feature of a person's psychology. It responds to developmental stage, to life load, to emotional processing skill built over time. The system is not static. It calibrates continually to what the organism is carrying. It will carry less when the organism is carrying less. There is evidence that the emotional resolution of a nightmare, the subjective sense, upon waking, that something has been processed, is associated with physiological changes during sleep. EEG studies of sleep during periods of active emotional processing show different slow-wave activity patterns compared to baseline nights. The brain is doing different work, and when that work is completed, when the signal has been processed, the patterns normalize. The translator worked. The draft was completed. The document was filed. This is what healthy nightmare processing looks like from the outside, the brain doing what it was built to do, and then moving on to what comes next. there is a documented phenomenon called dream incorporation, the tendency of external stimuli present during sleep to be woven into dream content, a phone vibrating nearby, music from another room, the sensation of hunger, the sound of rain. These enter the dreaming narrative and become part of its imagery. Researchers have demonstrated this. Experimentally, sounds played during REM sleep are incorporated into dream content approximately 40% of the time. The sleeping brain is never entirely closed. It is monitoring the environment, sampling, incorporating. The translator is still listening for new material, even while working on the existing draft. The alarm system and the environment are in constant, quiet conversation. The emotional themes of nightmares show meaningful correlations with personality dimensions measured during waking. People who score higher on emotional reactivity and negative affect tend to report significantly more frequent nightmares than those who score lower. This is not surprising from the threat simulation perspective. A system calibrated to run threat scenarios will run more of them if the underlying set point for threat detection is elevated. It also suggests an intervention point. Practices that reduce baseline emotional reactivity during waking hours, consistent sleep schedules, reduced alcohol, regular physical movement, and approaches that build emotional steadiness address the parameter that sets the alarm threshold. Not only the alarm itself, research on the nightmares of caregivers, people providing ongoing support to seriously ill family members, shows elevated nightmare frequency compared to matched controls, with content consistently featuring themes of failure, helplessness, and loss. The translator is processing the accumulated weight of sustained exposure to someone else's threat. The threat is not to themselves but to the person they are responsible for. And the emotional load is enormous. This finding demonstrates that the nightmare system responds to vicarious threat, not only direct threat. The system tracks everything the person is carrying. Not only what is happening to them, the alarm monitors the full weight of the life, not just the moments of direct danger. Halfway through, the picture is specific enough to read. The nightmare speaks in the only language available, emotional imagery, about the threats the system has identified, the material it has not yet processed, the fears the nervous system has decided are worth keeping legible. The question worth sitting with in the second half of this hour is not how do I make the nightmares stop? The better question, the one that opens something rather than closes it, is, what is this particular message saying, not in the abstract, but this one, in this season of your life? That shift in question is the beginning of what changes things. There is a difference between knowing the translator has a logic and being able to read what it's actually translating. The first half built the mechanism, how the system works, why it fires, what conditions turn up its volume. What the second half does is narrower and more personal. The research consistently shows that the nightmare with the most information in it is the one that recurs, the one that will not let you ignore it, the one that wakes you at the same hour, from something that has not changed. What we notice, sitting with this, with the people who have carried these dreams for years, is that the dream is almost never saying what it looks like it is saying on the surface. The imagery is the encoding. The feeling underneath is what the system is actually trying to reach you with. Let that settle where it wants to settle. Recurring nightmares follow a specific logic. Unlike single-episode nightmares, which are processed and integrated, recurring nightmares involve material that the brain has flagged as unresolved and continues to revisit cyclically. The hippocampus and amygdala maintain something like an emotional priority queue. Experiences that need processing, ranked by urgency. If the processing is incomplete, because the emotional intensity is too high, the context for integration isn't available, or the experience is too recent, the item stays in the queue. The brain returns to it, night after night, presenting the same draft, not because it is stuck, because it is waiting for something in the receiving system to be ready to read it. The most effective single change a person can make to reduce nightmare frequency across multiple meta-analyses is improving overall sleep quality and consistency. A regular sleep schedule, sufficient total sleep time, reduced alcohol consumption, and a stable sleep environment all reduce nightmare frequency more reliably than dream-specific interventions alone. Nightmares are more frequent and more intense when REM sleep is disrupted, fragmented, or rebounding from suppression. A well-structured night of sleep gives the translation system the conditions it needs to complete its work. The alarm fires more when the building's infrastructure is compromised. Sometimes the most powerful intervention is simply giving the system a better night to work in. The content of a nightmare is often more accurate than the dreamer expects. Researchers who have asked people to describe their nightmare content and then assessed their waking emotional concerns found significant correlations, not between the literal imagery and the literal situation, but between the emotional themes of the dream and what the person is actually carrying. The brain, running a nightmare about failing an important test, may belong to someone anxious, not about tests at all, but about performance, judgment, or the fear of being found inadequate. The translation is reliable even when the surface imagery is opaque. The code is emotional, not narrative. The letter arrived. The address just looks different from the contents. When a person wakes from a vivid nightmare, the body has discharged a significant amount of physiological activation, elevated cortisol, increased heart rate, muscle tension. This discharge does not in itself resolve the underlying material, but it may relieve some of the pressure that had been building. Clinicians sometimes describe this informally as the body releasing what had accumulated. The charge moved. Something was expressed, even if what was expressed needs further processing. The distinction matters. The waking is not the resolution. It is the signal that the system was working hard enough to break through the surface of sleep. The translator was pushing against something, and the push itself was felt. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT, has a well-documented indirect effect on nightmare frequency. The mechanism is primarily through sleep consolidation, as CBTI reduces sleep fragmentation and normalizes the architecture of the night. REM sleep becomes more regulated and less disruptive. What is notable is that nightmares often worsen briefly during the early stages of CBTI, before they improve. As sleep consolidation increases REM intensity, more material is processed, and initially, more of it breaks through. the storm before the quiet. The translation system running harder before it finds its rhythm. The brief worsening is not regression. It is the system finally getting the resources it needed to do the work. The processing that is actively avoided during waking hours does not disappear at night. What is pushed away during the day, through distraction, through busyness, through the particular efficiency of keeping things at a distance, does not dissolve. It waits. And at night, without the same avoidance strategies available, it surfaces with whatever intensity it has accumulated. This is one of the most robust and actionable findings in clinical sleep research. The texture of how emotional material is handled during waking hours has a direct, measurable relationship to what arrives during sleep. The nightmare's severity is, in part, a record of what was kept out of the day. Having a nightmare and then falling back asleep only to re-enter a similar or identical dream reflects the persistence of the emotional signal that generated the original dream. The processing system, having been interrupted, attempts to resume. The incomplete draft is still open. Waking strategies that reduce the emotional intensity before returning to sleep. Writing a few lines about the dream. Breathing slowly until the physiological arousal settles. Speaking it briefly to someone present can interrupt this continuity. The alarm is less likely to fire again on the same material if that material has received even a small amount of acknowledgement before sleep resumes. A partial response is still a response. The nightmare's relationship to grief has been studied specifically in bereavement research. People who have lost a close family member or partner show dramatically elevated nightmare frequency in the first 6 to 12 months following the loss, with content that often directly features the deceased or the circumstances of the death. This is the translation system doing the most difficult work it does. Integrating the loss of a person who was woven into every level of the nervous system's relational map. The dream is not haunting. It is attempting to complete an integration that the waking mind has not been able to finish. The alarm is marking something that must not be forgotten before it can be released. Research from Harvard's Sleep Lab has contributed to a model of sleep as targeted memory reactivation. The idea that the sleeping brain does not process memories randomly, but prioritizes those with the highest emotional salience. The most distressing experiences are moved to the front of the queue. Nightmares, on this model, are not a sign that the processing system is overwhelmed. They are a sign that it is doing its most important work, giving the most time and resources to the material that would cause the most damage if left unaddressed. The most alarming material gets the most attention. The translator is not ignoring anything. It is working on the hardest passages first. After waking from a disturbing dream, people are more likely to engage in self-reflection, to think about relationships, to reconsider recent events and their meaning. Brain research suggests elevated activity in the self-referential network during this period, the system responsible for autobiographical memory and social cognition. This activation is not pathological. It is an opening, a biological window created by the dream's processing activity. People who use this window, by writing, by sitting quietly with what arose, by speaking with someone, tend to report feeling that the dream processed something by morning. The nightmare wakes you up and briefly gives you access to what it was working on. That access has a window. What happens inside it matters. The emotional theme of a recurring nightmare is almost never about what the imagery suggests. Research on nightmare content in people going through major life transitions found that the dreams map the emotional truth of the experience with unusual precision. Not the literal events, but the feelings those events produced. Someone processing a professional loss may dream of arriving at a place that used to be home and finding it locked. Someone working through a betrayal may dream of speaking and finding no sound coming out. The imagery is the brain's best available symbol for the emotional signature. The translation is faithful even when the surface is opaque. Learning to read the symbol rather than the scene changes everything about what the dream is saying. There is research suggesting that regular dream journaling, not analysis, just description, gradually reduces the distress associated with nightmare content over time, even without explicit therapeutic work. The act of writing a dream within minutes of waking engages verbal processing systems that were not involved during the dream itself. This shifts the material from pure imagery and sensation into language, which brings it under a different kind of cognitive management. Over weeks of consistent journaling, many people report that nightmares become less frightening, not because they become less vivid, but because they have been brought into a form the waking mind can hold. Language doesn't dissolve the material. It makes it holdable. The smoke detector analogy has a limitation worth naming. Honestly, smoke detectors don't learn. Your nightmare system does. This is one of the most clinically significant findings in nightmare research. Through repeated engagement with dream content under safe conditions, which is what approaches like imagery rehearsal therapy formalized, the system's response to particular threat scenarios can change. The sensitivity can be recalibrated. A nightmare that has been processed, whose emotional content has been met, does not typically return with the same intensity. The brain updates the threat library. The alarm threshold for that specific scenario is adjusted downward. The translator learns what no longer needs the same urgency it once required. Among individuals with PTSD, nightmares are one of the most treatment-resistant symptoms, and also one of the most responsive when the right approach is used. Prazosin, a medication that reduces norepinephrine activity during REM sleep, has shown effectiveness in reducing PTSD-related nightmares by lowering the neurochemical intensity of the threat response during dreaming. Behavioral approaches, particularly imagery, rehearsal therapy, and exposure-based methods, have shown comparable effectiveness. The nightmare system can be changed by working on the chemistry, on the content, or on both simultaneously. Often, the most effective approaches address the body and the meaning at the same time. There is a practice sometimes called dream re-entry, a form of directed daytime visualization in which a person, in a relaxed but wakeful state, consciously returns to the space of a nightmare and continues or changes its narrative. This practice has roots in various traditional healing frameworks and has been studied in contemporary clinical contexts. The neurological mechanism is believed to involve the activation of similar cortical networks to those used during actual dreaming. But with the waking mind's regulatory capacity available, the dreamer is present in the scene, but not alone in it. The translator is still running, but now it has a co-author. The emotion of shame, distinct from fear, but closely related to the self-evaluation function of the nightmare system. Appears frequently in nightmare content across clinical populations. Dreams of public humiliation, exposure, failure witnessed by others, or the body's uncontrollable betrayal in a social context are among the most common nightmare themes after fear and anger. Shame-related nightmares may be particularly persistent because shame, as an emotion, resists being witnessed. The act of speaking the nightmare to another person, one of the most consistently effective ways to reduce its charge, requires exactly the exposure that shame makes most difficult. The alarm about exposure is quieted by exposure. The thing the dream is asking for is the thing shame makes hardest. Cross-cultural research on nightmare content has found that while the emotional themes are largely universal, threat, loss, failure, humiliation, the specific imagery is culturally inflected. People in highly industrialized societies more often dream of vehicle accidents and urban dangers. People in agricultural communities more often dream of natural disasters and animal attacks. The universal substrate is the same. The brain rehearsing the categories of threat most relevant to the life being lived. The specific rehearsal scenarios are drawn from the individual's environment. The system is adaptive. It trains on what is actually dangerous in the world the person inhabits, updating its threat library as the environment around it changes. One of the most consistently reported experiences among people who have worked with their nightmare content, through any method, is a sense that the nightmare was trying to show them something. This phenomenological report, consistent across cultures and methodologies, aligns with what the neuroscience describes as system generating imagery to convey emotional signal that couldn't get through during the day. The people who engage with, rather than flee from this signal, who ask what it is pointing to rather than how to silence it, tend, over time, to report that the nightmares decrease, not because they were suppressed, because they were heard. The translator stopped needing to send the same message once the message was received. REM sleep duration increases across the night. REM periods are shortest in the early hours of sleep and longest in the final 90 minutes before natural waking. The most vivid, emotionally intense dreams occur closest to the time the person would naturally wake. This is partly why nightmares are so commonly remembered. They occur close enough to the surface of sleep that the memory trace is still intact on waking. It also means that irregular sleep schedules, waking at different times on different days, create significant variability in REM exposure and in what gets remembered. A consistent wake time doesn't only support the body's rhythm, it regulates which part of the night's translation is available to be read. Research on the nightmares of people in sustained caregiving roles, providing ongoing support to someone seriously ill, shows elevated nightmare frequency compared to matched controls, with content consistently featuring themes of failure, helplessness, and loss. The translator is processing the accumulated weight of sustained exposure to someone else's threat. The load is not about personal danger, but about the danger to someone the caregiver loves and cannot fully protect. This finding matters because it demonstrates that the nightmare system responds to vicarious threat. Not only direct threat, the alarm monitors the full weight of the life. Not only what is happening to the person directly, it is tracking everything being carried. The default mode network, the brain's system for self-referential thinking, autobiographical memory, and social cognition, shows elevated activity in the period immediately after waking from a disturbing dream. Research on emotional processing suggests this integration window is most open in the first 20 to 30 minutes after waking. During this time, the dream is most accessible, the emotional content is most available, and the self-reflective systems are most active. After this window closes, as the day begins, as attention moves outward, the material becomes harder to access and harder to work with. This is why many clinicians who work with dreams suggest keeping something to write with beside the bed, not for later analysis, but for immediate capture of what the window briefly offers. There is a body of observation suggesting that people who have experienced and survived many nightmare episodes develop, over time, a degree of tolerance for disturbing dream content. They are more likely to recognize, within the dream, that something is a dream. They are more likely to remain emotionally present rather than fleeing the experience entirely. Something accumulates, a quality of dreaming resilience, not from the nightmares becoming less vivid, but from the relationship to them shifting. The alarm still fires, but the system that receives the alarm has accumulated evidence that firing does not mean catastrophe. The translator is still delivering difficult messages. The person receiving them has become a steadier reader. There is preliminary research exploring whether practices that build what researchers call affect tolerance, the capacity to be with difficult emotions without either suppressing or being overwhelmed by them, show correlations with reduced nightmare severity. Small studies exploring this connection suggest that increased affect tolerance during waking hours may raise the processing capacity of the REM system, allowing more material to be integrated per episode. The alarm still runs the simulation, but the receiving system is better equipped to process what the simulation produces. The two halves of the system, waking and sleeping, are in conversation. What changes in one changes what is possible in the other. The picture these facts have built is this: the nightmare is not a failure of the system. It is evidence the system is working, running its most important function on the most important material, in the only form available. What makes it feel like a malfunction is the waking mind's framework. This feels bad. Therefore, something is wrong. The sleeping brain is not operating under that framework. The shift that begins to quiet the alarm is moving from "this is happening to me" to "this is being done for me," not as comfort, as mechanism. And what we have is not a solution. What we have is a map. The map shows you where the translator is, what it is running on, and why it cannot be quieted by being ignored. It also shows something that the early facts only gestured at: the system, when given what it needs, knows how to resolve itself. The brain that generates the nightmare is the same brain that processes it. The alarm and the response team are the same team. What we notice, sitting at this threshold in the hour, where the facts are becoming fewer and the space between them wider, is that the question most people carry into this topic is: how do I make it stop? That is the right question to start with. The question that tends to open something, though, is different. What has this been trying to show me that I haven't been able to look at directly yet? Feel where that lands. When the nightmare system has processed its material, the emotional charge associated with the content decreases in measurable ways. The dream may still occur. The imagery may still be recognizable, but the body's response changes. The alarm fires at lower volume. This is the endpoint the processing system is always working toward. Not elimination, but calibration. The alarm at the right sensitivity for the actual level of threat that is present. The translator working on what is actually unresolved, not running the same passage indefinitely. Something has been filed. The urgency changes. The night begins to carry a different quality. Recurring nightmares that resolve show a characteristic pattern of dissolution. First, the content shifts, the imagery softens. The threat becomes less direct. The ending sometimes changes without any conscious intervention. Then frequency decreases. Then emotional intensity diminishes. Then the dream stops recurring. Clinicians use this sequence as a marker of successful processing. The order is reliable content first, then frequency, then intensity. You can tell where in the process the system is by noticing which of these has already changed. Something shifting in the content, even subtly, is the first signal that the translator has begun to update the draft. The transition from nightmare to neutral or even positive dream content about the same material is one of the most consistent markers of emotional integration in bereavement research. Someone who dreams for months of searching for a lost person in empty rooms may eventually dream of that person present, at peace, in a space that feels complete. The content has been transformed, not by conscious effort, but by the completion of the brain's processing cycle. This transition is sometimes described by the people who experience it as a moment of quiet surprise. The system finished its work. The translator delivered the final version. The alarm went quiet, not because it was turned off, but because the passage was finally complete. Sleep quality improves as nightmare frequency decreases, and this improvement has downstream effects on emotional regulation and daily functioning. The relationship runs in both directions. Better sleep reduces nightmares, and fewer nightmares improve sleep quality. Breaking the cycle at any point creates positive momentum throughout. Addressing sleep hygiene, nightmare-specific work, or daytime emotional processing each creates movement in the whole. Improving sleep quality also reduces the physiological stress load the nightmare system is responding to. Less accumulated activation means less material for the translator to work through each night. The silence begins to build on itself. One quiet night makes the next one more possible. The body's physiological memory of a nightmare, the muscle tension, the residual cortisol, the activation, clears more quickly when addressed directly in the transition period between sleep and waking. Slow breathing, gentle movement, morning light, brief quiet time before the day begins. These give the body a clear signal that the threat has passed. The system responds to this signal. It does not need to be convinced intellectually. It needs a physiological cue that the alarm state is no longer warranted. The body and the brain are working on the same problem with different vocabularies. The transition practice speaks both. People who carry chronic nightmares often develop a dread of sleep itself. The anticipation of nightmares creates a pre-sleep arousal state that delays sleep onset, increases REM fragmentation, and thus increases nightmare intensity. Addressing this anticipatory anxiety through consistent pre-sleep routines, gentle stimulus control, and shifting the belief about what sleep will bring is therefore often as important as addressing the nightmare content itself. The system is already primed before the eyes close. The alarm is set before the night begins. Quieting the anticipation changes what the night opens into before the translator even starts work. One of the most consistent predictors of nightmare resolution across studies is the quality of a person's social support. Specifically, having at least one relationship in which distressing emotional material can be spoken freely. People with this kind of relationship show significantly faster nightmare resolution than those who are more isolated. The translation system is not designed to work alone. It evolved in a social context. Speaking the dream aloud to someone who receives it without judgment engages the processing resources of language, narrative, and relational attunement simultaneously. The nightmare wants to be witnessed. The resolution is, in part, relational. The translator was always reaching towards someone who could hear it. The sense of helplessness within a nightmare, the paralysis, the voice that won't come, the legs that won't move, is not a passive experience neurologically. The motor inhibition of REM is being felt as content. What the body is doing is being experienced as what the body cannot do. The experience of helplessness in a nightmare is partly a somatic report the body during REM cannot move, and the brain generates a narrative that explains this. Practices that build a sense of agency and physical competence during waking hours have been found to reduce the frequency of helplessness themes in dream content over time. What the body learns during the day, the translator has available at night. Research on the long-term trajectory of nightmare frequency shows divergent paths between people who engage with their nightmares and those who do not. Those who engage, through whatever form of consistent, honest attention, show more sustained reduction in nightmare frequency and distress over time. The brain can process nightmare material on its own, given time and the right conditions. But when those conditions are not present, the material can remain active indefinitely. The translator needs a receiving system. Engagement creates the conditions for the work to complete. What changes is not the quality of the translation. It was always accurate. What changes is whether someone showed up to read it. The experience of waking from a nightmare and immediately reaching for a phone or screen is particularly disruptive to the natural processing window that follows waking. The visual stimulation interrupts the self-referential network activation that the nightmare has opened, before the integrative work of that network can be completed. What the nightmare created, a brief, biological opening toward the material it was processing, closes when the attention is redirected outward. The window is narrow. What happens inside it matters. In the first 15 minutes after waking from a disturbing dream, the choice of what to do with the eyes and the attention is more consequential than it might feel. The content of nightmares sometimes represents exactly what the person is most afraid to acknowledge during waking hours. Not because the unconscious is dramatic, but because the sleeping brain has no suppression mechanism available. What is kept out of consciousness during the day arrives in full intensity at night. The content is not symbol for something else. It is, often, the thing itself, expressed in the emotional language of imagery. rather than the controlled language of thought. The translator does not soften or manage. It delivers. What it says about what is actually present is unusually clear. The challenge is not reading the translation. It is being willing to look at what the translation says. The resolution of a chronic nightmare system is not experienced as silence. It is experienced as a shift in relationship to sleep. People who have moved through nightmare material describe a different quality of ease at the end of the night, not the absence of dreaming, but the absence of dread. Dreams continue. Some are still uncomfortable, but the relationship to that discomfort changes. They are no longer bracing against sleep. The alarm is still present, calibrated, appropriate, functional. It is no longer the loudest thing in the room. The translator is still working, but the person on the receiving end has learned to live alongside the work without fearing what the next delivery will bring. The concept of engaging actively with dream content, treating it as material that warrants honest attention, has moved from the margins of clinical practice toward the mainstream. Supported now by decades of research, the active component is not any specific technique, but the act of engagement itself, approaching the dream as something the mind produced for a reason, rather than noise to be dismissed. The alarm was asking for a response. When it receives one, even an imperfect, uncertain, just beginning one, it adjusts. The translator recalibrates toward what is actually needed, rather than continuing to send the same urgent message into silence. The smoke detector that has been calibrated too sensitively, that fires for burnt toast as readily as for fire, is not broken. It is miscalibrated. The goal of working with nightmares is not to disable it. It is to bring the threshold back to appropriate sensitivity for the actual level of threat in the life being lived now. The brain that has moved through a difficult season does not become fearless. It becomes accurately calibrated, responsive to what is actually dangerous, and quiet in the presence of what is not. This is what the nightmare system looks like from the inside. When it has done its work, the alarm is still there. It has simply learned the difference between smoke and fire. One of the most counterintuitive findings in nightmare research is that people who engage with their nightmare content report not only lower nightmare distress, but a greater sense of self-understanding overall. The nightmare, when received, does not only resolve, it informs. The person who has spent time understanding what the translator was responding to knows something about themselves they did not know before. The difficult material becomes a source of clarity. The fear becomes, over time, a rough map of what matters most to the person who has been carrying it. The alarm was always pointing somewhere real. Following it changes the territory. The final stage of nightmare processing, the stage where a recurring dream genuinely ceases, is not always marked by a dramatic last episode. Often, the person simply notices, weeks later, that the dream has not come for a while. The system did not announce its completion. It simply stopped needing to run the simulation. The material had been integrated. The threat had been addressed, or had passed, or had been placed in a context the nervous system could hold without urgency. The translator stopped sending the message not because it gave up, but because the message had finally been received, and there was nothing left to add. The research on nightmare resolution consistently points to the same place, not freedom from threatening dreams, but freedom from their grip. The brain that has processed its nightmare material still dreams. It still runs simulations. It still generates imagery about threat and loss and the things that matter. But the imagery no longer holds the person. The dreamer has developed something, earned through attention and time, that might be called security in the territory of their own sleeping mind. The alarm is trusted. The calibration is appropriate. The night is no longer a space that requires bracing against before it is entered. What remains, after everything the research offers, is not a technique or a protocol. It is a reorientation. The nightmare that has been waking you is not the enemy of your rest. It is the system that cares too much to go quiet, insisting, night after night, that something has not yet been looked at, that some material needs the attention that the waking day could not give it. When you stop struggling against the alarm and start listening to it, really listening, with steadiness rather than dread, you have already begun the work it was trying to get you to do. The shift is not from fearful to fearless. It is from fighting the translator to reading what it wrote. The systems that generate nightmares are the same systems that allow anticipation of danger, preparation for loss, rehearsal of responses before they are needed. The nightmare is the shadow of the brain's most protective function. You cannot have one without the other. The dreamer who never has nightmares is not better protected. They are differently calibrated. The goal, always, is calibration, the system responsive to what is real, quiet when there is nothing urgent, trusted enough that when it fires, the response is to listen rather than to run. The path from what is wrong with me to what is my brain trying to do is not a long one, but it requires a kind of patience, a willingness to stay with not knowing the full answer immediately. The nightmare yields its signal gradually to the person who keeps showing up, keeps noticing, keeps asking the question with genuine curiosity rather than dread. Presence is not the resolution. It is the condition that makes resolution possible, and it begins wherever you are, including here. At the end of this hour, in whatever state the night left you, the brain that has processed its nightmare material sleeps differently. The transition into sleep is easier. The fragmentation is less. The morning carries less residue. These are not metaphors. They are documented changes in the physiology of sleep, measurable in how the body moves through its stages, in how it handles the night's demands. Processing is not abstract. It has a body, and that body, when it has been heard in whatever language it speaks, the language of image, of fear, of the dream that kept returning, eventually settles. Not because it ran out of material, because the material was finally met. The word nightmare shares its root with mare, the old spirit of the night, believed to press on the chest of the sleeper, to make the breath heavy, to bring visions of darkness. What every dreaming mind throughout history understood, without neuroscience, without clinical framework, simply from waking frightened from sleep, night after night, across thousands of years, was that the darkness held something, not to destroy them, but to be understood. The terror, when met with presence, could become knowledge. The alarm, when answered, grew quiet. That understanding is not ancient superstition. It is the oldest accurate description of what the research now confirms. The language changed. The truth did not. The alarm was never trying to harm you. It was trying, in the only language it had, to reach you. Not a technique, not a protocol, a relationship between you and the part of you that never stops watching, never stops caring enough to sound the alarm. The translator kept working because it believed the message was worth delivering. And now you know enough to agree. Something has changed in the way the night feels. Not because the facts explained it away. Explanation was never what this hour was for. But because you spent time in the company of a system you had been afraid of, and found that it was not trying to frighten you, it was trying to reach you with something it considered too important to let go undelivered. The brain lobbied for your attention, night after night, toward whatever your nervous system had decided needed to be brought forward. The imagery was not random. The translation was faithful, even when it arrived in a form you couldn't immediately read. You are different inside this now, not because you solved it, because you listened, and a translator that has been listened to begins to adjust what it sends next. That adjustment is what quiet sounds like, when it finally comes. There is a question that opens naturally from tonight, and it is the one the Dream Science playlist has been building toward. If the nightmare is a transmission, who is the sender? Where do the images come from? And why does the brain choose the ones it chooses? From the enormous library of everything you have ever experienced. The next video in the Dream Science playlist goes one layer deeper into exactly that. Why we dream of people we haven't seen in years. It begins where tonight left off, in the part of the system that decides what to surface and what to keep quiet. And why some faces that have not crossed your mind in years suddenly appear at the bedside. The next video in the Dream Science playlist begins there. The translator is quieter now. Not because the night has nothing left to say, but because something in you has shifted toward listening. A message received with steadiness does not need the same volume. Let what the shoulders have been holding find its way down. Sleep is the continuation of what this hour began. The circuits will consolidate. The translator will keep working, but the receiving end is ready. If your eyes have found the dark, let them stay. Rest well, quiet one. The message was worth hearing, and you came tonight to hear it. Where nightmares become messages, and messages finally find their rest. Good night.